In the depths of space, where alien civilizations rise and fall like tides, there exists a truth that few species dare acknowledge. Humans don't just survive the impossible, they thrive in it. When the rest of the galaxy sees weakness, humans see opportunity. When others see broken outcasts, humans see potential allies worth fighting for. This is the story of how one human's refusal to accept the way things are didn't just save a life. It sparked a revolution that would shake the foundations of an entire star system. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquering enemies, but from choosing to stand with those whom everyone else has abandoned. What happens when an unstoppable human force meets an immovable alien tradition? The galaxy is about to find out. The salvage vessel Meridian's Edge drifted through the asteroid field like a metal predator hunting for prey. Captain Marcus Chun adjusted the scanner array for the third time in an hour, his weathered hands moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. 43 years in space had taught him that patience often meant the difference between profit and vacuum exposure. Still nothing on the deep scanners, Captain, reported his first officer, a young woman named Sarah Kim who had joined the crew 6 months ago fresh from the Mars Merchant Academy. Her enthusiasm hadn't yet been ground down by the harsh realities of salvage work. Marcus grunted acknowledgement, his dark eyes scanning the debris field that stretched before them. The Kithara system had been the site of a massive battle 3 standard years ago, when the Vulcan Empire had clashed with the Hegemony Coalition over mining rights. Both fleets had been decimated, leaving behind a treasure trove of salvageable technology for those brave enough to navigate the radioactive graveyard. "Keep us on course for Grid 77 Alpha," Marcus ordered, settling back in his captain's chair. The leather creaked under his weight, a sound that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Intelligence reports suggest there might be intact drive cores in that sector. Sarah nodded and began adjusting their trajectory. The young officer had proven herself capable, if somewhat naive about the dangers they faced. Marcus had seen too many promising careers end in the cold vacuum of space, but something about Sarah reminded him of himself at that age. Determined, hungry, and just reckless enough to succeed. The proximity alarm chimed softly, drawing Marcus's attention to the navigation display. A small blip appeared on the screen, barely registering against the background radiation. Too small to be a warship, too large to be simple debris. "What do you make of that?" Marcus asked, pointing to the anomalous reading. Sarah leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the sensor controls. The image sharpened, revealing the outline of what appeared to be an escape pod or small personal craft. "Looks like a life pod, Captain. Vulcan design, judging by the energy signature." Marcus frowned. Vulcan life pods were built to last. They're emergency systems capable of sustaining life for months if necessary. But this one had been drifting for 3 years. The chances of finding anything alive inside were virtually zero. "Life signs?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Scanning now," Sarah replied. She paused, her expression shifting from professional curiosity to surprise. "Captain, I'm reading one life form aboard that pod. Weak but definitely alive." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. In all his years of salvage work, he had never encountered a survivor from the Kithara battle. The political implications alone were staggering. The Vulcan Empire would pay handsomely for the return of one of their own, regardless of rank or status. "Prep the cargo bay for emergency docking," Marcus ordered, rising from his chair. "And get Dr. Patel to medical. If there really is someone alive in there, they're going to need immediate attention." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the cargo bay as the automated docking clamps secured the Vulcan life pod to his ship's hull. The pod was smaller than he had expected, its sleek design reflecting the Vulcan's preference for efficiency over comfort. Scorch marks along its hull told the story of a desperate escape from a dying ship. Dr. Rajesh Patel, the ship's chief medical officer, waited nearby with a portable medical kit. The elderly physician had served on a dozen different vessels during his career, treating everything from radiation poisoning to alien parasites. If anyone could save a 3-year survivor, it was him. "Atmospheric composition is stable," reported Lieutenant Hayes, the ship's engineering officer. Pressure's a bit low, but within acceptable parameters. Marcus activated the pod's external release mechanism. The hatch cycled open with a soft hiss, releasing a cloud of stale air that carried the metallic scent of recycled atmosphere. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the cramped interior. What Marcus saw inside made him stop short. The survivor was definitely Vulcan, but unlike any Vulcan he had ever encountered. Where most Vulcans were tall and imposing, with distinctive ridged foreheads and pronounced cranial crests, this individual was smaller, more delicate in build. Her, for the survivor, was unmistakably female. Features were softer, more refined than typical Vulcan physiology. Most striking were her ears, which were pointed and fox-like, and her amber eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light. She was conscious but clearly weak, her breathing shallow and labored. When she saw Marcus and his crew, her expression shifted from hope to something resembling shame. She attempted to speak, but only managed a whisper in accented Standard Galactic. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know what I am. If you wish to leave me here, I understand." Dr. Patel pushed past Marcus and began his examination, his professional demeanor overriding any cultural considerations. "Severe malnutrition," he muttered, checking her pulse. "Dehydration, possible organ damage from extended stasis. We need to get her to medical immediately." As they carefully transferred the survivor to a medical gurney, Marcus noticed something else that made him pause. Along her arms and legs were what appeared to be ritual scars, precise geometric patterns that had been deliberately carved into her flesh. Among the Vulcans, such markings were reserved for criminals and outcasts, individuals who had been permanently banished from their clans. "What's your name?" Marcus asked as they wheeled her toward the medical bay. The Vulcan woman's amber eyes met his, and he saw a mixture of gratitude and despair that struck him unexpectedly. "I am Zarathek of no clan," she replied. "I was communications officer aboard the cruiser Burning Talon. I have been exiled." The way she said the last word carried a weight of pain that transcended species barriers. Marcus had encountered exiled Vulcans before, usually criminals or political dissidents who had been stripped of their clan affiliations and cast out into space. They were considered dead by their own people, non-persons who had forfeited their right to exist within Vulcan society. But something about Zarathek seemed different. The ritual scars on her body were too precise, too deliberate to be punishment markings. They looked almost ceremonial, as if they had been applied with reverence rather than cruelty. Over the next several hours, Dr. Patel worked to stabilize their unexpected passenger. Marcus found himself returning to the medical bay repeatedly, ostensibly to check on her condition, but really to satisfy his growing curiosity about her story. There was something about Zarathek that didn't fit the typical pattern of Vulcan exiles. When she was finally stable enough for conversation, Marcus pulled up a chair beside her medical bed. The ship's medical bay was cramped but well-equipped, its sterile white walls lined with diagnostic equipment that hummed quietly in the background. "The doctor says you're going to recover," Marcus began, settling into the uncomfortable metal chair. "But it's going to take time. You've been running on emergency rations for 3 years." Zarathek nodded weakly, her fox-like ears twitching slightly, a gesture that Marcus found oddly endearing. "I am grateful for your kindness, Captain, but I must warn you, harboring an exile may bring consequences from the Empire." "Let me worry about the Empire," Marcus replied. "What I want to know is how you ended up in that pod, and why you were exiled in the first place." For a long moment, Zarathek was silent, her amber eyes staring at the ceiling. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was born different," she said. "Among my people, genetic variations are not tolerated. My appearance, my smaller stature, the shape of my ears, these things mark me as aberrant. Defective." Marcus felt a surge of anger at the casual way she described such obvious prejudice. "So they just threw you out because you look different?" "It is more complex than that," Zarathek continued. I was permitted to serve in the fleet because my technical skills were needed. But I was never allowed to take a mate, never permitted to breed. I was considered genetically impure. The clinical way she described her own dehumanization made Marcus's jaw clench. He had encountered many forms of bigotry during his travels, but the Vulcan caste system was particularly cruel in its systematic exclusion of those deemed unworthy. What changed? Marcus asked. What made them exile you completely? Zarathek's expression grew even more pained. During the battle at Kythera, our ship was badly damaged. The captain ordered me to seal the communications bay and prepare for evacuation. But there were wounded crew members trapped in that section, 5 young officers who would have died if I had followed orders. Marcus began to understand. You chose to save them. I disobeyed a direct order from my superior, Zarathek said. In doing so, I delayed the evacuation and caused the ship to sustain additional damage. 3 other crew members died because of my actions. But you saved 5 lives. The mathematics of survival are not considered when evaluating such choices, Zarathek replied. I was court-martialed and sentenced to exile. The ritual scarification you see on my body marks me as permanently severed from all clan affiliations. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing what he had heard. In human military tradition, Zarathek's actions would have earned her a commendation, possibly even a medal. The idea that she had been punished for attempting to save lives struck him as fundamentally wrong. So what's your plan now? Marcus asked. Where will you go? Zarathek's laugh was bitter and hollow. Exiles do not make plans, Captain. We simply exist until we no longer can. I have no clan, no family, no place in any civilized system. I am, as your people might say, dead to my own kind. The resignation in her voice bothered Marcus more than he cared to admit. Throughout his career, he had made it a point to stay out of alien politics and cultural disputes. His job was to salvage valuable materials and to a profit, not to play galactic social worker. But something about Zarathek's situation felt different. Perhaps it was her obvious intelligence and competence, or the way she had sacrificed her own future to save others. Or maybe it was simply the profound loneliness he saw in her amber eyes, a loneliness he recognized because he had felt it himself. Well, Marcus said, standing up from his chair, you're welcome to stay aboard my ship as long as you need to recover. We can figure out the rest later. Zarathek's eyes widened in surprise. Captain, I cannot ask such kindness from you. You barely know me. You're right, I don't know you, Marcus admitted. But I know that anyone willing to risk court-martial to save lives is the kind of person I want on my crew. For the first time since they had found her, Marcus saw something like hope flicker in Zarathek's amber eyes. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it was there. I have technical skills, she said quietly. Communications, navigation, sensor operations. If you would permit me to work for my passage. We'll talk about that when you're stronger, Marcus replied. For now, just focus on getting better. As Marcus left the medical bay, he found himself already considering the implications of his decision. Taking on an exiled Vulcan crew member would complicate his business relationships and potentially put his ship in danger. The smart move would be to drop her off at the next civilian station and wash his hands of the entire situation. But Marcus Chun had not survived 4 decades in space by always making the smart move. Sometimes, he reflected, the right thing to do was also the most dangerous. And something told him that Zarathek's story was far from over. 3 days later, as Dr. Patel cleared Zarathek for light duty, Marcus made his decision official. Standing in his quarters, he accessed the ship's crew manifest and created a new entry. Zarathek, communications specialist, hired on a provisional basis pending evaluation. It was a small gesture, but Marcus knew it would change everything. He was about to learn just how right he was. The first month aboard the Meridian's Edge proved to be a delicate balancing act for everyone involved. Zarathek moved through the ship like a ghost, performing her duties with quiet efficiency while carefully avoiding any situation that might cause friction with the existing crew. Marcus watched her navigate the complex social dynamics of life aboard a salvage vessel, noting how she instinctively deferred to others even when her expertise clearly exceeded theirs. The ship's communications array had been giving them trouble for weeks before Zarathek's arrival. Lieutenant Hayes, normally competent with most ship systems, had been struggling with intermittent signal failures that occurred seemingly at random. Within her first week on duty, Zarathek had not only identified the problem, a cascade failure in the quantum encryption matrix, but had also designed an elegant solution that improved the array's efficiency by 23%. I still don't understand how you figured that out, Hayes admitted one afternoon as they worked together in the communications bay. The engineering officer was a practical man in his 30s, with calloused hands and a straightforward manner that Marcus appreciated. I've been working on ship systems for 8 years, and I never would have thought to check the quantum resonance patterns. Zarathek's fox-like ears twitched slightly. A mannerism Marcus had learned indicated either amusement or embarrassment. Vulcan communications technology operates on different principles than human systems, she explained, her accented standard galactic careful and precise. The quantum encryption protocols we use are more intricate than most species prefer. Intricate is one word for it, Hayes replied with a grin. I call it brilliantly overcomplicated. Marcus, who had been observing the interaction from the doorway, noted the small smile that crossed Zarathek's features. It was the first genuine expression of pleasure he had seen from her since her recovery. The simple acknowledgement of her competence seemed to mean more to her than any formal commendation. But not all interactions went so smoothly. The ship's newest crew member, a former corporate security officer named Jake Morrison, made no effort to hide his disapproval of harboring a Vulcan exile. Morrison was young, ambitious, and possessed the kind of rigid thinking that made him excellent at following protocols, but terrible at adapting to unexpected situations. I'm just saying, Captain, Morrison argued during the weekly crew meeting, that taking on an exile puts us all at risk. The Vulcan Empire doesn't differentiate between harboring criminals and aiding refugees. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the young man's earnest expression. The conference room was cramped, barely large enough to accommodate the ship's 7-person crew around its small table. Zarathek sat at the far end, her posture rigid with tension. Are you suggesting that Specialist Zarathek is a criminal, Morrison? Marcus asked, his voice deliberately neutral. I'm suggesting that her legal status makes her a liability, Morrison replied. What happens when we dock at a Vulcan station? What happens if we encounter an Imperial patrol? The same thing that happens when we encounter any potentially hostile force, Sarah Kim interjected from across the table. The first officer had become an unexpected advocate for Zarathek, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit in another young professional trying to prove herself. We handle the situation professionally and move on. Morrison shook his head. This isn't about professionalism. This is about practical risk assessment. The Empire, Dr. Patel interrupted, his elderly voice carrying quiet authority, exiled one of their most gifted technical specialists because she chose to save lives over following orders. If that makes her a criminal in their eyes, then perhaps their definition of criminality needs examination. Marcus noted how Zarathek's amber eyes widened slightly at the doctor's words. She seemed genuinely surprised that anyone would defend her actions, as if she had accepted the Empire's judgment as absolute truth. Dr. Patel raises an important point, Marcus said. But Morrison's concerns aren't entirely unfounded. Zarathek, what's your assessment of the risks we face by having you aboard? All eyes turned to the Vulcan woman. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze focused on her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Mr. Morrison is correct about the legal implications, she said. By Imperial law, I am considered dead. Aiding me is technically a crime punishable by confiscation of vessel and crew. However, the Empire rarely enforces such laws against non-Vulcan vessels unless there are other factors involved. What kind of other factors? Sarah asked. If we were carrying contraband, or if we had violated Imperial space, or if we were perceived as posing a strategic threat, Zarathek explained. The risk increases significantly if we operate in systems with heavy Imperial presence. Marcus appreciated her honesty. Lesser individuals might have downplayed the dangers or made promises they couldn't keep. Zarathek was giving him the information he needed to make an informed decision, even though that information might work against her. So we avoid Imperial space, Marcus concluded. Problem solved. Morrison looked frustrated. Captain, it's not that simple. The Empire has treaties with dozens of systems. Their influence extends far beyond their official borders. Then, we adapt, Marcus replied firmly. We've operated in hostile territory before. This isn't fundamentally different. But Morrison was right about one thing. Having Zarathek aboard did complicate their operations. 3 weeks after the crew meeting, they received their first real test when a priority salvage contract came through that required work in the Zirian system, a nominally independent region that maintained close ties with the Vulcan Empire. Marcus gathered his senior staff in his quarters that evening to discuss their options. The job offered substantial compensation, enough to cover operating expenses for 6 months, but it would mean operating in space where Imperial patrols were common. We could leave Zarathek at Meridian Station, Hayes suggested. Pick her up on the way back. Marcus saw the way Zarathek's expression tightened at the suggestion, though she said nothing. The idea of being abandoned, even temporarily, clearly triggered painful memories of her exile. Absolutely not, Sarah said firmly. She's part of our crew now. We don't leave crew members behind. I appreciate the sentiment, Zarathek said quietly, but Mr. Hayes' suggestion is logical. I do not wish to endanger this ship or its crew for my sake. Marcus studied her face, noting the careful control she maintained over her emotions. Everything about her posture and tone suggested acceptance of the proposal, but her amber eyes told a different story. He could see the fear there, not of physical danger, but of abandonment. No, Marcus said finally. Hayes, you're a good officer. But Sarah's right. We don't leave crew members behind. Zarathek comes with us, and we deal with whatever complications arise. The mission to Zirian proved to be more challenging than anyone anticipated. The salvage site was located in a debris field created by the collision of 2 automated cargo haulers, a mundane accident that had scattered valuable technology across several cubic kilometers of space. The work was routine, but time-consuming, requiring careful navigation through unstable wreckage. On their 3rd day in the system, the complications Marcus had expected finally materialized. The Meridian's Edge was in the middle of extracting a particularly valuable piece of quantum computing hardware when their sensors detected an approaching vessel. Imperial patrol ship, Sarah reported from the sensor station. Definitely military configuration. They're hailing us. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained calm. Zarathek, you're off duty as of right now. Hayes, take over communications. Sarah, standard salvage protocols. Zarathek nodded and moved toward the exit, but Marcus caught her arm as she passed his chair. Stay close to the bridge, he said quietly. If we need your expertise, I want you available. The Vulcan patrol ship Iron Discipline was a sleek destroyer that could have reduced the Meridian's Edge to scrap metal in seconds. Its commander, a stern-faced Vulcan named Captain Thekvar, appeared on their main screen with the kind of imperial bearing that suggested he had never questioned an order in his life. Human vessel, you are operating in restricted space, Captain Thekvar announced. Transmit your salvage permits and prepare for inspection. Marcus kept his expression neutral as Hayes transmitted their documentation. The permits were legitimate, purchased through proper channels, and filed with the appropriate authorities. But he knew that Imperial captains had broad discretionary powers when it came to interpreting regulations. Your permits appear to be in order, Captain Thekvar said after reviewing the transmissions. However, we have received intelligence suggesting that human salvage vessels in this sector may be harboring fugitive personnel. We will conduct a standard crew inspection. Marcus's blood ran cold, but he maintained his composure. Of course, Captain. We're happy to cooperate with Imperial security protocols. 20 minutes later, Captain Thekvar and 2 armed subordinates materialized on the Meridian's Edge S bridge via transporter beam. The Vulcan captain was exactly what Marcus had expected: tall, imposing, with the kind of rigid posture that came from a lifetime of military discipline. His subordinates flanked him with practiced precision, their weapons held at ready, but not quite threatening. "I am Captain Thekvar of His Imperial Majesty's vessel, Iron Discipline," the Vulcan announced. "I require verification of all crew identities." Marcus nodded and gestured for his crew to step forward. One by one, they presented their identification documents for scanning. Sarah Kim, human, former Merchant Academy. Lieutenant Hayes, human, registered engineer. Dr. Patel, human, certified medical officer. Jake Morrison, human, security specialist. "Is this your complete crew roster?" Captain Thekvar asked, his dark eyes scanning the bridge. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. Captain Thekvar's gaze lingered on Marcus for a moment longer than necessary. "Our intelligence suggests that a human vessel matching your configuration may have recently taken aboard unauthorized personnel in the Kithra system." "I'm afraid our intelligence doesn't match yours, Captain," Marcus replied. "We haven't been in the Kithra system for over a year." It was technically true. They had skirted the edge of the system, but never actually entered it. Captain Thekvar seemed to accept the statement, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. "Very well," the Imperial captain said. "We will conduct a standard vessel inspection to verify your cargo manifests." The next hour was the longest of Marcus's life. The Imperial inspection team moved through his ship with methodical efficiency, scanning every compartment and checking every storage bay. Marcus accompanied them, answering questions and providing access codes while trying to appear cooperative rather than nervous. Zarathek had taken refuge in the ship's small library, a cramped space filled with technical manuals and recreational reading material. She had disabled the room's internal sensors and activated a basic privacy screen, standard procedure for crew members who wanted to avoid detection during inspections. Marcus held his breath as the inspection team passed the library without stopping. Imperial protocols apparently didn't require them to disturb crew members engaged in off-duty activities, a small mercy that Marcus silently thanked whatever deities might be listening. When the inspection was finally complete, Captain Thekvar returned to the bridge with his subordinates. His expression was neutral, but Marcus detected a hint of frustration in his posture. "Your vessel and cargo appear to be in compliance with Imperial regulations," Captain Thekvar announced. "However, I want to make something clear, Captain Chun. The Empire takes a dim view of those who harbor fugitives or aid enemies of the state. If you encounter any individuals who might fall into such categories, your duty is to report them immediately." "Understood, Captain," Marcus replied. "We appreciate the Empire's commitment to maintaining order in the sector." Captain Thekvar nodded curtly and activated his communicator. 3 to beam up. As soon as the Vulcan officers had departed, Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. They had passed inspection, but barely. If Captain Thekvar had been more thorough, or if he had decided to scan the library compartment, the situation would have ended very differently. "That was too close," Sarah said, voicing what everyone was thinking. Marcus nodded grimly. "Hayes, how long until we can finish this salvage operation?" 6 hours. Maybe 8 if we run into complications," the engineer replied. "We don't have 8 hours," Marcus said. "That patrol ship is going to be back, and next time they'll be looking harder. Strip out anything valuable, and let's get out of here." 4 hours later, the Meridian's Edge jumped out of the Zirian system with holds half full, but crew intact. Marcus found Zarathek in the ship's small observation lounge, staring out at the stars with an expression of profound melancholy. "Thank you," she said without turning around as Marcus approached. "For what?" "For not abandoning me to save yourselves," Zarathek replied. "It would have been the logical choice." Marcus settled into the seat beside her, studying her profile in the starlight. "Logic isn't the only factor worth considering." Zarathek was quiet for a long moment. "Among my people, logic is the only factor that matters. Emotion, loyalty, compassion, These are considered weaknesses that cloud judgment and lead to poor decisions. Is that what you believe? Marcus asked. I believed it once, Zarathek admitted. But 3 years in an escape pod give one time to reconsider many assumptions. When I chose to save those crew members instead of following evacuation orders, I acted on impulse rather than logic. My training told me it was wrong, but my heart told me it was right. Marcus nodded. And now? Now, I think perhaps my heart was wiser than my training, Zarathek said. But it is a dangerous lesson to learn. Why dangerous? Zarathek turned to look at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. Because once you start questioning one fundamental assumption about how the universe works, it becomes impossible to stop questioning others. And that path leads to places from which there is no return. Marcus understood exactly what she meant. His decision to take her aboard had been the beginning of his own journey down that same path. There was no going back to the simple certainties of salvage work and profit margins. Whether he liked it or not, he was now part of something larger and more complex. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Marcus said finally. Zarathek's fox-like ears twitched slightly. The gesture he had learned indicated amusement. We shall see, Captain Sean. We shall see. The message that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday morning while the Meridian's Edge was docked at Freehold Station for routine maintenance. Marcus was reviewing quarterly profit reports when Sarah burst into his quarters without knocking, her face pale with excitement or alarm. He couldn't tell which. Captain, you need to see this, Sarah said, holding out a data pad with trembling hands. We just received a priority transmission on one of the old Imperial emergency frequencies. Marcus took the pad and scanned the message. It was written in standard Vulcan military code, the kind used for official communications between fleet vessels. What made it unusual was that it had been transmitted on an open channel, broadcasting to anyone with the proper decryption algorithms. Can you read it? Sarah asked. Marcus shook his head. Zarathek can. Where is she? Engineering Bay 2, helping Hayes with the sensor array upgrades. Marcus found Zarathek elbow-deep in a sensor housing, her small hands working with delicate precision to install new quantum detection modules. Her technical expertise had proven invaluable during their 3 months together, and Hayes had taken to consulting her on nearly every major system upgrade. Zarathek, I need your translation skills, Marcus said, offering her the data pad. She wiped her hands on a maintenance rag before taking the device. Her amber eyes scanned the text rapidly, and Marcus watched her expression change from curiosity to shock to something approaching horror. What is it? Hayes asked, noting her reaction. Zarathek read the message twice more before looking up at Marcus. It is a distress call from the Vulcan colony ship, Soaring Flame. They suffered engine failure 3 days ago and are stranded in the neutral zone. Marcus frowned. Colony ships were massive vessels designed to transport thousands of families to new worlds. If one was stranded in deep space, the situation was serious indeed. Why are they broadcasting on an emergency frequency instead of requesting help through normal channels? Because they cannot request help through normal channels, Zarathek replied, her voice tight with emotion. The Soaring Flame carries exiles, Captain, families who have been banished from the Empire and are seeking new homes beyond Imperial space. The implications hit Marcus immediately. An exile ship would receive no assistance from Imperial forces, and few civilian vessels would be willing to aid such a politically sensitive cargo. If the Soaring Flame was stranded, its passengers, including children and elderly, would slowly die while the galaxy looked the other way. How many people aboard? Sarah asked. The manifest lists 12,000 souls, Zarathek replied. Entire families, Captain. Children who have committed no crime except being born to parents the Empire deemed unworthy. Marcus felt the familiar weight of moral responsibility settling on his shoulders. The smart business decision would be to ignore the distress call and continue with their planned salvage operations. Getting involved with exile politics could destroy his reputation and make future contracts impossible to obtain. But Marcus looked at Zarathek's face, and saw something that made the decision for him. For the first time since he had known her, her carefully maintained emotional control was cracking. Her people, her real people, the outcasts and unwanted, were dying, and she was helpless to save them. Hayes, how long would it take to reach their position? Marcus asked. The engineer consulted his navigation computer. 18 hours at maximum cruise speed. But, Captain, we're talking about a colony ship with massive power requirements. Even if we could reach them, we don't have the capability to provide meaningful assistance. Maybe not by ourselves, Marcus replied, an idea beginning to form in his mind. But we're not the only salvage vessel in this sector. Over the next 4 hours, Marcus worked the communications array like a diplomatic instrument. His reputation in the salvage community was solid, and he had built relationships with dozens of independent captains over the years. One by one, he began calling in favors. Captain Rodriguez of the Lucky Strike owed Marcus for a tip that had led to a profitable antimatter salvage job. Captain Singh of the Venture's Dream had borrowed money from Marcus 2 years earlier and was eager to clear the debt. Captain O'Brien of the Celtic Wind simply liked the challenge of an impossible rescue mission. By evening, Marcus had assembled a makeshift fleet of 7 salvage vessels, each bringing unique capabilities to the rescue effort. The Lucky Strike carried heavy-duty power generators. The Venture's Dream had expanded cargo capacity for evacuating passengers. The Celtic Wind boasted the most sophisticated medical bay in the sector. This is insane, Morrison said during the final planning session. We're risking 7 ships and 43 crew members to save people who are already considered dead by their own government. They're not dead, Marcus replied firmly. They're inconvenient. There's a difference. Zarathek had been quiet throughout the planning process, contributing technical expertise when asked, but offering no opinions about the rescue mission itself. Marcus understood her reluctance. She had been trained from birth to accept exile as a form of social death, to internalize the Empire's judgment that outcasts were unworthy of consideration. Zarathek, Marcus said as the other captain signed off on the conference call, I need to know if you're truly committed to this mission. If you have any reservations about helping your own people, now is the time to voice them. She was silent for a long moment, her fox-like ears twitching with what Marcus had learned was internal conflict. Captain, you do not understand what you are proposing to do. These are not political refugees or war victims. These are genetic deviants, criminals, social failures, the dregs of Vulcan society. Is that what you believe? Marcus asked. Are you genetic refuse, Zarathek? Are you a social failure? Her amber eyes flashed with something Marcus couldn't quite identify. According to Imperial law, yes. According to Imperial law, Marcus countered, you're also dead. But you're sitting here talking to me, contributing to this crew, making us all better at our jobs. So maybe Imperial law isn't the ultimate authority on your worth as a person. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert from the bridge. Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom with barely contained excitement. Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Soaring Flame. You need to hear this. Marcus and Zarathek rushed to the bridge, where Sarah was working frantically to clean up a weak signal. The voice that emerged from the speakers was clearly Vulcan, but speaking in a dialect Marcus didn't recognize. Zarathek, can you translate? Marcus asked. She listened intently for several minutes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. It is not standard Imperial Vulcan, she explained. They're speaking in the old tongue, the language our people used before the Empire unified our homeworld. What are they saying? The ship's main power core is failing faster than anticipated, Zarathek translated. They estimate 6 days before complete system failure. But, Captain, there is something else. They're not just asking for rescue. They're asking for sanctuary. Marcus frowned. What's the difference? Rescue implies temporary assistance until they can continue their journey, Zarathek explained. Sanctuary, it means they are seeking permanent protection from those who would harm them. It means they are asking you to become their shield against the Empire. The weight of that revelation settled over the bridge like a heavy blanket. Marcus had thought he was organizing a simple rescue mission, but the reality was far more complex. These weren't just stranded colonists. They were refugees fleeing persecution who needed ongoing protection. That changes things, Sarah said quietly. Marcus nodded. It changed everything. Providing emergency assistance to stranded travelers was one thing, but offering long-term sanctuary to Empire exiles was an act of open defiance that could have serious consequences. I need to contact the other captains, Marcus said. They deserve to know what they're signing up for. One by one, the assembled fleet captains received the updated information. Marcus expected at least half of them to withdraw from the mission, but he was surprised by their responses. Captain Rodriguez was characteristically blunt. Hell, Chin, if we're going to piss off the Empire, might as well do it properly. Captain Singh was more thoughtful. My grandmother fled religious persecution on Earth. I know what it means to need sanctuary. Captain O'Brien was philosophical. The universe has enough people following orders and not enough people doing what's right. By the time the fleet departed Freehold Station, all 7 vessels remained committed to the mission. Marcus felt a surge of pride in his colleagues, followed immediately by terror at the magnitude of what they were attempting. The journey to the Soaring Flame's position took 16 hours instead of the predicted 18, thanks to favorable space currents and the navigational expertise of Zarathek, who proved to have an intuitive understanding of hyperspace dynamics that surprised even herself. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates provided in the distress call, the sight that greeted them was both magnificent and heartbreaking. The Soaring Flame was a massive vessel, nearly 3 kilometers long and designed to carry an entire civilization to the stars. But it was clearly dying. Its running lights flickered sporadically, and debris from failed systems created a small cloud around its hull. Mother of God, Captain Rodriguez whispered over the fleet communication channel. How many people did you say were aboard that thing? 12,000, Marcus replied, studying the sensor readings. And their life support systems are failing. The rescue operation that followed would later be remembered as one of the greatest logistical achievements in the history of independent space travel. 7 small salvage vessels worked around the clock to transfer power, supplies, and essential personnel from the dying colony ship. Marcus found himself working directly with the Soaring Flame's Leadership Council, a group of elder exiles who had organized their people's exodus from Imperial space. The council chairman was an elderly Vulcan named Elder Corvex, whose genetic variations included translucent skin that revealed the blue-green pattern of his circulatory system. You risk much to aid us, Captain Chun, Elder Corvex said during one of their planning sessions. The Empire will not look kindly upon those who help the genetically impure escape their judgment. Marcus was beginning to hate that phrase, genetically impure. It reduced living, breathing people to nothing more than statistical variations in a breeding program. Elder Corvex, can I ask you a personal question? Marcus said, do you consider yourself impure? The old Vulcan's eyes, which were silver instead of the typical brown, twinkled with what might have been amusement. Captain, I consider myself magnificently diverse. It is the Empire that sees diversity as corruption. Over the course of the rescue operation, Marcus gained a deeper understanding of the exile community. These were not the criminals and deviants that Imperial propaganda portrayed, but rather individuals whose only crime was genetic diversity. Artists whose creativity made them suspect. Scientists whose questions challenged orthodox thinking. Families whose children displayed variations that fell outside acceptable parameters. Zarathek worked tirelessly during the operation, coordinating communications between the fleet and the colony ship. Marcus watched her interact with her fellow exiles and saw something he had never seen before: acceptance. For the first time since he had known her, Zarathek was among people who saw her differences as assets rather than flaws. She belongs with them, Dr. Patel observed one evening as they watched Zarathek coordinate the evacuation of the colony ship's medical bay. I know, Marcus replied, though the thought filled him with unexpected sadness. He had grown attached to having Zarathek aboard his ship, and the idea of losing her competence and quiet companionship was more painful than he cared to admit. But The decision of where Zarathek belonged was about to be taken out of everyone's hands. On the fourth day of the rescue operation, as the fleet was preparing to transfer the last group of evacuees, the sensors detected multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Imperial Battle Group, Sarah reported, her voice tight with tension. 3 destroyers and a heavy cruiser. They're moving to intercept. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. An Imperial battle group could destroy his entire fleet without working up a sweat. The smart move would be to surrender immediately and hope for leniency. But as he looked at the massive colony ship and the thousands of families they had spent 4 days saving, Marcus realized that surrender was not an option. These people had already been abandoned once by those who should have protected them. He would not abandon them again. All ships, this is Chun, Marcus announced over the fleet communication channel. Prepare for combat operations. The response was immediate and unanimous. 7 independent captains who had risked everything for people they had never met were not about to back down now. Chun, you magnificent bastard. Captain O'Brien's voice crackled over the comm. Let's show these Imperial bullies what free spacers can do. As the Imperial battle group closed on their position, Marcus turned to Zarathek, who had remained at her station despite the approaching danger. You don't have to stay, Marcus told her. This isn't your fight anymore. Zarathek's amber eyes met his, and, for the first time since he had known her, Marcus saw no trace of uncertainty or self-doubt. Captain, she said firmly, with respect, you are wrong. This has always been my fight. I was simply too afraid to join it until now. The Imperial battle group emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their sleek warships arranged in a tactical pattern that spoke of years of military precision. At their head was the heavy cruiser Righteous Fury, its hull bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Marcus had faced long odds before, but nothing quite like this. Imperial fleet. This is Captain Thekran of His Imperial Majesty's vessel Righteous Fury. A stern voice announced over all frequencies. You are interfering with imperial justice and harboring enemies of the state. Surrender immediately or face the consequences. Marcus recognized the voice. It was the same Captain Thekvar from the patrol ship they had encountered months earlier, apparently promoted to command a much larger vessel. The Vulcan captain's tone carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never been seriously challenged. Fleet captains, sound off, Marcus said over the private channel his ships shared. Rodriguez here. Lucky Strike ready for whatever comes next. Singh reporting. Venture's Dream standing by. O'Brien here. Celtic Wind locked and loaded. One by one, all 7 captains confirmed their readiness to fight. Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. These men and women were about to risk everything for people they had never met before this week. Zarathek, Marcus said, turning to his communications specialist, open a channel to the Righteous Fury. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the Imperial cruiser. Captain Thekran was exactly what Marcus had expected. Tall, imposing, with the kind of rigid bearing that came from a lifetime of unquestioned authority. His dark eyes swept over the bridge of the Meridian's edge with obvious disdain until they fixed on Zarathek. You, Captain Thekran said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I know you. Zarathek straightened in her chair, her fox-like ears flattening against her skull in what Marcus had learned was a sign of extreme stress. Captain Thekran, it has been many years since our paths crossed. Communications Officer Zarathek of the cruiser Burning Talon, Captain Thekran continued, his words precise and cutting. Sentenced to exile for disobedience, cowardice, and genetic deviation. I see you have found new masters to serve. Marcus felt his temper flare at the casual cruelty in the Imperial captain's voice, but Zarathek's response surprised him. I have found a place where my contributions are valued, rather than merely tolerated, she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious pain the encounter was causing her. I have found people who judge me by my actions rather than my genetic profile. Captain Thekran's expression shifted to something approaching disgust. Touching. But Your new friends cannot protect you from the consequences of harboring enemies of the Empire. Captain Shun, you have 60 seconds to transfer all exile personnel to our custody. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your vessels. Marcus leaned forward in his captain's chair, meeting the Imperial commander's gaze directly. Captain Thekran, these people have committed no crime except being born different. They're seeking new homes beyond Imperial space, not threatening Imperial security. Their very existence threatens Imperial security, Captain Thekran replied coldly. Genetic deviation cannot be allowed to spread beyond our borders. These exiles must be contained. The callous way he spoke about 12,000 living people made Marcus's blood boil. But before he could respond, Zarathek stood up from her station and moved to stand beside his chair. Captain Thekran, she said, her voice carrying a strength Marcus had never heard from her before, I formally invoke the right of challenge under the old laws. The effect of her words on the Imperial bridge was immediate and dramatic. Captain Thekran's eyes widened in shock, and several of his officers began speaking urgently in rapid Vulcan. Marcus had no idea what the right of challenge meant, but it was clearly significant. The old laws were abolished centuries ago, Captain Thekran said, but his voice lacked its previous certainty. The old laws were suspended, not abolished, Zarathek replied, and they could be invoked by any Vulcan in defense of their pack. Elder Corvex's voice crackled over the communication channel from the colony ship. Captain Thekran, the exile recognizes her obligation to protect her pack. Do you recognize your obligation to honor the ancient traditions? Marcus watched the Imperial captain's face cycle through a range of emotions. Anger, frustration, and what might have been fear. Whatever this right of challenge entailed, it was putting him in an impossible position. Zarathek, Marcus said quietly, what exactly are you doing? Something I should have done years ago, she replied. I'm standing up. Captain Thekran was silent for nearly a full minute before responding. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. Very well. The right of challenge is acknowledged. But understand, exile, that invoking the old laws means accepting their full consequences. If you fail, not only will you die, but your entire pack will be forfeit. I understand the terms, Zarathek replied. Do you choose personal combat or trial by ordeal? Trial by ordeal, Captain Thekran said immediately. You will defend your pack's evacuation while we attempt to stop it. If you can protect them until they reach neutral space, the Empire will consider the matter closed. If you fail, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. How long do we have? Marcus asked. The colony ship's engines are temporarily repaired, Elder Corvex reported. But they will not last long under stress. Perhaps 4 hours at maximum speed before complete failure. Marcus did quick calculations in his head. 4 hours to reach neutral space while being pursued by an Imperial battle group. The colony ship was massive and slow, while the Imperial warships were fast and heavily armed. It seemed impossible. All ships, this is Chun, Marcus announced over the fleet channel. We're about to attempt the most insane rescue mission in the history of space salvage. I want maximum speed toward neutral space, with a soaring flame in the center of our formation. What's the plan, Captain? Rodriguez asked. Marcus looked at his small fleet on the tactical display. 7 tiny salvage vessels preparing to escort a massive colony ship past some of the Empire's finest warships. It was David versus Goliath, except David was outnumbered and outgunned by a factor of 20 to 1. The plan, Marcus said, is to be too stubborn to die. The next 4 hours became a masterclass in creative desperation. The Imperial warships were faster and more powerful than the fleeing convoy, but Captain Thekran was constrained by the terms of the ancient challenge. He could not simply destroy the refugee fleet outright. He had to give them a fighting chance to reach safety. What followed was a running battle unlike anything in recorded military history. The salvage vessels used every trick they had learned in decades of dangerous work, turning their industrial equipment into improvised weapons and their cargo bays into makeshift shields. Captain Rodriguez deployed his heavy-duty power generators to create electromagnetic interference that confused Imperial targeting systems. Captain Singh used his expanded cargo bay to launch clouds of metallic debris that played havoc with enemy sensors. Captain O'Brien's sophisticated medical bay became a field hospital for crews from damaged vessels. But it was Zarathek who proved to be the key to their survival. Her intimate knowledge of Imperial tactics and technology allowed her to predict enemy movements and coordinate defensive responses that kept the convoy together against overwhelming odds. Imperial Destroyer Iron was moving to flank the colony ship, she reported, her fingers flying over the sensor controls. They will attempt to disable the engines with a precision strike in 47 seconds. Rodriguez, Singh, intercept course, Marcus ordered. Give them something else to shoot at. The two captains responded immediately, their ships moving to block the Imperial destroyer's approach. The warship's weapons fire-struck Lucky Strike's armored hull, causing significant damage but not destroying the vessel. I'm venting atmosphere from decks 3 and 4, Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with pain. But we're still fighting. Medical team to Lucky Strike, O'Brien announced. We're coming to get you. And so it went for nearly 4 hours, a deadly game of cat and mouse played out across millions of cubic kilometers of space. The Imperial fleet had the firepower to destroy the refugees, but the constraints of the ancient challenge forced them to fight with one hand tied behind their backs. Zarathek seemed to transform during the battle, her natural timidity replaced by fierce determination. She coordinated defensive maneuvers with the skill of a seasoned military commander, anticipating Imperial tactics and countering them with creative solutions that left their enemies struggling to adapt. How did you know they would try to collapse our formation by targeting the outer escorts? Marcus asked during a brief lull in the fighting. Because that is what I would have done, Zarathek replied. I serve aboard Imperial vessels for 12 years, Captain. I know how they think. With 2 hours remaining until neutral space, the situation took a dramatic turn. The soaring flame engines began showing signs of imminent failure, their jury-rigged repairs finally giving way under the stress of combat maneuvering. Colony ship is losing power, Elder Corvex reported. Engine efficiency down to 30% and falling. Captain Thekran's voice cut across the communication channels. Exile, your pack falters. Surrender now, and I will show mercy to the children. Marcus saw Zarathek's amber eyes flash with something he had never seen before. Pure, focused rage. Captain Thekran, she replied, her voice carrying deadly calm. You mistake exhaustion for defeat. My pack has not yet begun to fight. What happened next would be remembered in exile folklore for generations to come. Zarathek began speaking rapidly in the old Vulcan tongue, her words carrying across all frequencies. Marcus couldn't understand the language, but the effect on the colony ship was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the massive vessel, 12,000 voices began responding in unison, their combined chorus creating a harmonic frequency that resonated through the ship's hull. The sound was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. Part war cry, part lament, part declaration of defiance. What are they doing? Sarah asked, her voice filled with awe. They are remembering who they are, Zarathek replied, tears streaming down her face. They are choosing to live rather than merely survive. The harmonic resonance created by 12,000 voices had an unexpected effect on the colony's ship's failing engines. The synchronized vibrations somehow stabilized the quantum fluctuations that had been causing the power failures, giving the massive vessel a final burst of speed. Impossible, Captain Thekran whispered, his voice barely audible over the communication channel. But it was happening. The soaring flame surged forward with renewed power, its engines burning brighter than they had in days. The entire convoy accelerated toward the neutral zone boundary, now less than an hour away. The Imperial battle group made one final, desperate attempt to stop them. All three destroyers converged on the convoy's position, their combined firepower finally overwhelming the salvage fleet's defenses. The Venture's Dream took a direct hit to her engine compartment and began falling behind. Captain Singh's voice crackled over the communication channel, calm despite the fact that his ship was dying. "This is Singh. Engines are gone, and life support is failing. Tell my wife I kept my promise." Marcus felt his heart break as he watched the brave captain's ship disappear in a ball of superheated plasma. But even in death, Singh had bought them precious minutes. The convoy was now only 30 minutes from safety. The Celtic Wind was next, her medical bay taking a direct hit that killed her entire emergency response team. Captain O'Brien's last transmission was characteristically philosophical. "Well, lads, it seems the universe has one more lesson to teach me. Make it count." With 2 ships lost and the others badly damaged, the convoy limped toward the neutral zone boundary. Marcus watched the chronometer tick down the final minutes, each second an eternity of suspended hope. 20 minutes to safety. 15 minutes. 10 minutes. The Imperial fleet made one final attempt to stop them, launching every fighter craft and missile they could muster. The space around the convoy filled with deadly energy as weapons fire crisscrossed the darkness. 5 minutes. 3 minutes. 1 minute. And then, suddenly, they were across. The neutral zone boundary was just an arbitrary line in space, marked by nothing more than navigation beacons. But it might as well have been a wall of adamant steel. The Imperial fleet stopped pursuing immediately, their ships holding position at the boundary, while the convoy continued into free space. "We made it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Marcus looked around his battle-scarred bridge, taking inventory of what they had accomplished and what it had cost them. 2 good captains were dead, along with their crews. 5 ships were badly damaged and would require months of repairs. But 12,000 people were free. "Captain Thekran," Zara Thek said, activating the communication system one final time, "the challenge is complete. The pack has reached safety." The Imperial captain's face appeared on the screen one last time. His expression was unreadable, part anger, part grudging respect, part something that might have been relief. "The ancient laws are satisfied," he said formally. "The Empire considers this matter closed." The communication channel went dead, and the Imperial fleet began withdrawing toward their own territory. Marcus watched them go with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "So, what happens now?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked at Zara Thek, who was staring out at the stars with an expression of profound peace. For the first time since he had known her, she looked truly free. "Now," Marcus said, "we find out what happens when outcasts decide to stop running and start building something new." 6 months after the Great Exodus, as the exile historians have begun calling it, Marcus stood on the observation deck of Haven Station and marveled at what 12,000 determined outcasts could accomplish when they put their minds to it. The station had been nothing more than an abandoned mining platform when they arrived in the Kepler 442 system, but it was rapidly transforming into something unprecedented in galactic history. The transformation wasn't just physical, though that was impressive enough. The exiles had converted the mining tunnels into living quarters that could house 50,000 people. They had repurposed the ore processing facilities into manufacturing centers capable of producing everything from clothing to starship components. Most remarkably, they had done it all using principles of cooperation and mutual aid that stood in stark contrast to the rigid hierarchies that dominated most galactic civilizations. But the real transformation was in the people themselves. Marcus watched through the transparent aluminum windows as groups of Vulcan children played in the station's newly constructed parks, their laughter echoing through corridors that had known only the sound of industrial machinery for decades. These children displayed the same genetic variations that had marked their parents as outcasts. Unusual skin pigmentation, atypical cranial ridges, different ear shapes, but here, those differences were celebrated rather than hidden. "The psychological profiles are remarkable," Dr. Patel said, joining Marcus at the window. The elderly physician had been conducting voluntary health assessments for the exile population, documenting their transition from refugees to colonists. "I've never seen such rapid improvement in mental health indicators. It's as if an entire civilization is healing from trauma." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on a small group gathered near the central plaza. Zarathek was there, along with Elder Corvex and several other community leaders, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Over the past months, Marcus had watched Zarathek emerge as an unexpected leader among the exiles, her combination of technical expertise and emotional intelligence making her a natural coordinator for complex projects. "Have you told her yet?" Dr. Patel asked, following Marcus's gaze. "Told her what?" "That you're in love with her." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Doctor, I think you've been spending too much time analyzing other people's psychological profiles." Dr. Patel chuckled. "My friend, I've been practicing medicine for 43 years. I can recognize the symptoms of a man who has found something worth living for, but is too afraid to reach for it." Before Marcus could respond, his communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender's identification made his blood run cold. It was from Captain Thekran of the Imperial cruiser Righteous Fury. "This is unexpected," Marcus muttered, accepting the transmission. Captain Thekran's stern features appeared in holographic projection, but something about his expression seemed different from their previous encounters. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. "Captain Shun," the Imperial officer began, "I hope this communication finds you well. I am contacting you regarding a matter of mutual interest." Marcus felt his guard go up immediately. "I'm listening, Captain." 3 days ago, my ship encountered a convoy of vessels fleeing Imperial space, Captain Thekran continued. The convoy consisted of 17 ships carrying approximately 8,000 refugees, families whose genetic profiles mark them as deviants according to Imperial law. Marcus's heart began racing. More exiles were fleeing the Empire, but this time there was no ancient challenge to protect them. What happened to them? "They were intercepted at the Gamma Hydri checkpoint," Captain Thekran replied. "According to Imperial protocol, they should have been detained and returned to the appropriate authorities for processing." The clinical way he described what was essentially a death sentence made Marcus's stomach churn. But, I find myself conflicted about my orders," Captain Thekran admitted. "The refugees include over 2,000 children," Captain Shun. "Children whose only crime is being born to parents the Empire deems unfit for reproduction." Marcus stared at the holographic image, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you asking for help, Captain?" "I'm asking if your exile community has the resources to accept additional refugees," Captain Thekran said. "And I'm asking if you would be willing to negotiate their safe passage to neutral space." The request hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb. Marcus realized that Captain Thekran was essentially asking him to help the Imperial officer commit treason against his own government. "Captain," Marcus said carefully, "are you aware of what you're proposing?" "I am aware that I swore an oath to protect the people of the Empire," Captain Thekran replied. "But I am beginning to question whether the Empire's current policies truly serve that goal." Marcus ended the transmission and immediately sought out Zarathek. He found her in the station's main conference room, where she was reviewing construction schedules with a team of engineering specialists. When she saw his expression, she excused herself from the meeting and followed him to a private office. "We have a situation," Marcus said, replaying Captain Thekran's message. Zarathek listened in silence, her amber eyes growing wider with each detail. When the recording finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This is not possible," she said finally. "Captain Thekran is one of the Empire's most loyal officers. He has never questioned orders in his entire career." "Well, he's questioning them now," Marcus replied. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Zarathek began pacing, her fox-like ears twitching with agitation. 8,000 refugees. We have the space and the industrial capacity to support them. But, Marcus, if we help him, we're not just harboring exiles anymore. We're actively encouraging Imperial officers to defy their government. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Marcus asked. The question seemed to surprise her. "You're talking about revolution, Marcus. About undermining the fundamental structure of Vulcan society." I'm talking about saving lives, Marcus replied. Just like we did 6 months ago. Zarathek stopped pacing and turned to face him. 6 months ago, we were saving people who had already been cast out by the Empire. This is different. This is reaching into Imperial space and offering alternative choices to people who haven't yet been judged. Marcus studied her face, trying to read the complex emotions playing across her features. What are you afraid of? I am afraid, Zarathek said slowly, that once we cross this line, there will be no going back. The Empire will not tolerate active rebellion among its officer corps. They will respond with overwhelming force. Maybe, Marcus agreed. Or maybe they'll realize that their system is fundamentally broken and needs to be changed. Zarathek's laugh was bitter. You still believe that people can change, don't you? That institutions can be reformed rather than destroyed, don't you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus watched Zarathek struggle with her answer, seeing the conflict between her trained loyalty to imperial structure and her growing understanding of its fundamental injustice. I used to believe that the Empire was right, she said finally. That genetic purity was necessary for social stability, that exiles were dangerous deviants who threatened the common good. But living here, seeing what our people have accomplished when freed from those constraints, I'm beginning to think that perhaps the Empire is not just wrong, but actively evil. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. In all their months together, Zarathek had never expressed such a radical opinion. Her willingness to question the fundamental assumptions of her upbringing represented a profound psychological shift. So what do you think we should do? Marcus asked. Zarathek was quiet for another long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength and certainty that Marcus had rarely heard from her. I think we should save those families, she said. And I think we should make Captain Thekran an offer he cannot refuse. What kind of offer? The chance to become something better than an Imperial officer, Zarathek replied. The chance to become a protector of the innocent rather than an enforcer of genetic prejudice. 12 hours later, Marcus found himself in one of the most surreal negotiations of his career. The meeting took place aboard a neutral merchant vessel in deep space, with representatives from Haven Station, the Imperial cruiser Righteous Fury, and the refugee convoy gathered around a single conference table. Captain Thekran looked even more uncomfortable in person than he had in his holographic transmission. The Imperial officer's rigid posture and formal bearing stood out sharply against the casual dress and relaxed manner of the exile representatives. I want to be clear about the terms, Captain Thekran said, his voice carefully controlled. I can ensure safe passage for the refugee convoy to neutral space, but I cannot guarantee protection beyond that point. We understand, Elder Korvex replied. Haven Station is prepared to receive all refugees and provide temporary shelter while permanent housing is constructed. The logistics are more complex than simple shelter, Zarathek interjected. 8,000 people will require medical care, education, job training, cultural integration support. We're not just offering sanctuary, we're offering a new way of life. Captain Thekran's gaze fixed on Zarathek with what might have been curiosity. You speak as if you have experience managing such transitions. We have experience being the people who need such transitions, Zarathek replied. That gives us insight that formal refugee management programs often lack. Marcus watched the Imperial captain process this response. Something about Zarathek's confidence and authority seemed to surprise him, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. There is another matter to consider, Captain Thekran said. My actions in facilitating this refugee transfer will not go unnoticed by Imperial Command. There will be an investigation, possibly a court-martial. Then, come with them, Marcus said impulsively. The suggestion shocked everyone at the table, including Marcus himself. But as soon as he said it, he realized it made perfect sense. Your career in the Imperial fleet is over the moment you help these refugees escape, Marcus continued. But Haven Station could use someone with your strategic and tactical expertise. Captain Thekran's expression cycled through surprise, fear, and what might have been hope. You are suggesting that I abandon my oath, my duty, my entire life to join a community of exiles? I'm suggesting that you honor your oath to protect people by joining a community that actually protects people, Marcus replied. For a moment, the conference room was completely silent. Marcus could hear the subtle hum of the merchant vessel's life support systems and the distant whisper of stars beyond the hull. The Imperial Oath, Zarathek said quietly, requires officers to protect the people of the Empire from all enemies, foreign and domestic. But what happens when the Empire itself becomes the enemy of its own people? Captain Thekran stared at her, as if seeing a ghost. You remember the officer's oath? I served faithfully for 12 years, Zarathek replied. I believed in that oath. I still believe in it. But I now understand that protecting people sometimes means protecting them from their own government. The Imperial captain was silent for a long time, his gaze distant, as if he was reviewing his entire career through new eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. My youngest daughter, he said slowly, was born with heterochromatic eyes, one brown, one green. The genetics board classified it as a minor deviation, allowable, but not encouraged for breeding purposes. She is 12 years old, and already she knows she will never be permitted to have children of her own. Marcus felt his heart clench at the pain in the Imperial officer's voice. Every night when I put her to bed, she asks me why she's different, Captain Thekran.